Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. And today we're doing something that Lib Dems all love. But do we all do it right? And do you know how to do it if one suddenly springs on you? We're talking about by-elections, and not just parliamentary by-elections, but council by-elections. I've got a stellar panel with me today who are all experienced by-election campaigners and candidates, and I've been in the party for ages and know the tips and tricks that can help you get over the line, or, as we'll talk about a little bit later, get your campaign objectives, because sometimes it's not just about winning, it's about you've got lots of goals along the way. So I'll introduce our wonderful crew. We have Neil Alexander, who has just come off the back of a by-election up in the Highlands of Scotland. Hello, Neil.
Hi, how are we doing? I'm still recovering. I'm getting my sleep back. That's good.
Well, that's what the Christmas break's for. That's perfect. And we have the leader of the Sheffield Lib Dems, Shaff Mohammed, who just had an incredible by-election victory last week as we're recording this. Congratulations, Shaff.
Thank you. And it's a fantastic result. First time ever anyone's won that seat other than Labour.
Wow, and we will get into that a lot about how we do with shifting political patterns as well. And the grandee of the party now is Mary Ranier Wilson, who is now back on this podcast after it's been a bit of a hiatus, Mary. It must have been maybe 4 years since your last one. We must have broke some sort of rules with it, but welcome back, Mary.
Thank you very much. I am back to being a lady of leisure after my brief sojourn of being a Lib Dem staff member, and very much looking forward to concentrating on winning elections rather than helping everybody else to turn their computers on.
Well, sometimes turning the computer on can help you win elections as well. But let's go into it. So by-elections can happen for all sorts of reasons. And the most common ones, and we're going to talk about council ones, is there's usually a council resignation. It can be sometimes a scandal. Sometimes it can be very simple life choices. They've just got a new job and have had to move away or something like that. Also, we'll talk about the fact that quite a lot of by-elections happen because of deaths. You know, the fact is, lots of councillors are still very, very elderly. And unfortunately, it is part of the process, whether in your party or in opposition, that you will have to deal with deaths and then by-elections happening. Now, we've got, are there any other ones I haven't thought about there, guys? There's disqualifications as well, Neil.
Yeah, well, if you look up at Labour in Glasgow just in the last week, they had a councillor who was elected who was a council employee and didn't resign their job as a council employee. So that's triggered a by-election in Glasgow again. So there is the odd admin error from local parties.
Yeah, and
so you're also forgetting the big reason why we've had a lot of recent by-elections is that all of our councillors got elected as MPs.
Yes.
And that was particularly a thing for Labour, where they had a lot of their MPs were getting elected as MPs in places that were not where they had originally stood as councillors. And so there was even more of an impetus for them to resign immediately. And you can't really represent two different places.
And that's a really good example, because one of the things you decide really early on in your by-election, so you know your information, so whether someone's moved away, you'll notice and obviously Shaff will know this as a councillor, there's all sorts of gossip and rumours that happen within a council that you think, so-and-so councillor's not particularly happy, or I hear there's a job maybe lined up for such and such. And so you know then there might be something coming. And I suppose one of the first things you want to do, Shaff, when you get that information, is start planning for if a by-election happens.
Absolutely. And the first thing you do is you cut the turfs on Connect if you haven't done that. You know, that's the most obvious thing, because we all laugh, but actually in some of these seats that we've never had anyone but Labour, and you're a small party and you just don't have the resource, so you're probably just cutting the turf. So, you know, it's one of the things. I've got one of our members who's not able to put as much time on the doors on the streets, but, you know, burning the midnight oil, he's quite happy to beaver away to cutting turfs in seats that we've not really targeted for many, many, many years or ever. And he's done it. Obviously, those turfs need re-looking at and adjusting once you get on the ground, because it looks all right on a map, but then it doesn't. Yeah, so the 1 or 2 rounds we had in the most recent by-election in Woodhouse, where I'm thinking, these two roads don't actually meet together. They look all right. You know, you have to drive all the way around. So we had to make some adjustments. But yeah, Connect, turfs, really important. But for me, the most important thing, John, is someone who wants to win.
Yeah.
There's no point just saying, I'll happily put my name down as a paper candidate. In a by-election, you don't do paper candidates. The Lib Dems don't anyway.
I suppose, Mary, you'd agree with that about actually finding, if you, whether it just drops on you or whether you've got some sort of lead in time, actually figuring out who's going to stand there. I know it sounds all ridiculously obvious, but there'll be lots of local parties where you think, well, we're strong in some patches, but have never like I can say this in like urban Preston, there are bits where that is a lot less active Lib Dem wise than the suburbs where I represent. Actually finding someone ideally locally, but who is willing to give it a fight is really important.
It is. You can't win anything unless you've got somebody that wants to win. Having said that, sometimes that happens quite late. The one time that Abby Bell will ever admit to being wrong about something was when she told my local party that we couldn't win a by-election in 6 weeks when we had we were trying to win a different one at the same time, and we got the candidate to agree to stand 5 hours before nominations closed. He's been the councillor for that area for the last 8 years. But so yeah, you really need to find somebody that wants to win, and quite often that person isn't in your party. And if you've got a long lead time, then you can find somebody, as we did then with Doug, who is a local community campaigner, particularly important in more rural areas where they're a little bit more parochial. So you do need somebody who is very local, which you might not in the centre of some cities. You can get away with moving people around a bit more. But finding that person who wants to make their community better, and is also a Liberal, because that's obviously quite important. But getting that candidate, making sure that they know what's involved, both in the campaign, because it's going to be an intense 6 weeks, and then in being a councillor afterwards. But frankly, in a lot of these places, particularly in places where they've been let down so much in the past by lazy Labour or Tory candidates taking them for granted, if you've got a by-election, a little bit of a local party machine, and a candidate who really wants to win, then the sky's the limit, as Shaff showed us.
And Neil, what about you as who was the candidate? What else is vital for you to get sorted out before you can get going with your campaign?
So it's an interesting one. So again, brilliant result, Shaff. So I think we have to keep plugging the fact that he's did so well last week, and it was a brilliant result. But I think looking at it from our perspective in Murray, it's interesting. We just had our AGM actually last night, and we were reflecting on the past year, and our strategy from last year into this was we kind of roughly knew how the general election would look in Murray. It wasn't a traditional Lib Dem area, and resources were pulled to the Highland seats, and we all kind of knew that was coming, and for the right reasons. But we did know, and I had a note of it somewhere down, that the very prominent Scottish Conservative leader would do a very prominent Scottish Conservative leader thing and absolutely knacker their local candidate's chances, I should say. And it would lead to the SNP winning here, which would trigger a council by-election in my patch. So we strategised and knew very, very early that that's pretty much what we were looking to do, is build the vote from day one. So we had the amazing Trish Robertson and Ardris here, so we grew the vote there for the general election by working hard there. We also worked hard in Elgin. Come a few months later, the by-election gets triggered after. Basically what we thought would happen did happen. And also there was other factors like reform kind of grew as well. The Greens ran a candidate, but it pretty much happened as we thought it would. And then we managed to get a massive swing in Elgin just by pulling very targeted resources there. Instead of trying to be very carte blanche and covering every area in the general election and subsequently even in the latter weeks of the by-election. So we figured out where our voters were going to be quite quickly. And yes, we've still got more work to do, but the progress we managed to make from strategizing like that was really, really insightful. And being a candidate was a lot of fun because there was kind of the synergy of looking at the Murray issues, which had a lot of relevance to the Elgin by-election issues. So it kind of informed and kept things going because we had that continuity. I would 100% recommend, if somebody was a general election candidate or a Scottish election candidate in 2026, to consider going for 2027 in the council elections in Scotland as well.
I suppose what we're going to talk about is actually, the campaign objectives, because we've mentioned this loads on the podcast about it's to get to win. It's very unlikely you win in one go. If you do, brilliant, that's great. But it's about consistency of effort and actually making sure your by-election leads to something. And so we can think of, what the classic kind of parliamentary one was the North Shropshire by-election, where we were distant third. Obviously, parliamentary by-elections are kind of bonkers in terms of the whole party descends on it, but there were wins there regardless. And even if I go back to Cheshire and Amersham, we thought, even because at that point we hadn't had these huge collapses in the Tory vote. So Cheshire and Amersham, there was still a lot of, can we do, can we do it? Are we going to do it? But we knew that actually, even if we didn't win, we've picked up thousands upon thousands of voter ID data, new poster sites, new deliverers. All these things mean added objectives you should think about when you're doing your by-election. Isn't that right, Shaff?
Absolutely. Look, if you looked on paper at Woodhouse Ward, we came 5th. We only got 195 votes in May. Right? So if you just looked at it on paper, you'd think, are you mad? You're not going to win this. I remember having this conversation with Nick Clegg in 2016, where we stood in a ward called Morsborough nearby, and we were 4th, I think, or something, distant 4th. And there was a by-election. Sadly, a Labour councillor passed away a few months after being elected, and we said, right, we think we can win. And I remember Nick Clegg pulling me up. He just stopped being late, and he was like, Shaff, there's a lot of people complaining, going, Shaff's wasting a lot of time and effort here. Are you sure this is, And I said, tell you what, I said, have you knocked on any doors? And he's like, no. I said, good, come with me then. So we took Nick Clegg to Morsborough, right? This is a Labour-held seat with Labour MPs, so it's beginning of time, Labour councillors across the... And we knocked on doors. We've got a picture of it. I'll share it with you, John. And he came away going, you've sniffed something out here. And I said, exactly. And I said exactly the same thing to people. Look, by-elections are different. When you're 28 seats up in Sheffield, but like the national general election we've had, we end up fighting the marginal ones.
Yeah.
But in by-elections, it's a totally different ballgame. And for me, it was important, the candidate. So people went out and spoke to potential candidates, and I said, I'm not going to get involved, but anyone that wants to talk to me, I'm happy to speak to anyone that's thinking of standing, and I will give them my commitment in terms of the time, effort I will put in, and the party machine and others. And basically, we said to the candidate, of course, you will have commitment. So in our case, our candidate was involved in a local pipe band that actually met in the ward. But what that meant was, right around Remembrance Sunday, he'll be doing other stuff, And I said, that's fine. You just tell us when you're not going to be available. That's totally okay. The team will carry on working when you've got commitments that you can't get out of. So being realistic with the candidate about their time and being honest about what they can do and when they can do it. For us, it was then a core team. We had to get a core team. You can't just do it yourself. So, we got an agent very quickly, Andrew Sanger, and then we just divvied up the jobs. So I didn't take many jobs, because then it allows me as leader to step in if things are not going right. And to their credit, the team took on the jobs and they did the jobs. Yes, we had problems. Believe it or not, we lost our organizer. Our organizer had got a job. So this is news to everyone. So we ran this campaign without an organizer. Our organizer left at the end of September. That we had, Patrick, fantastic organizer we had, but he went. So he's gone to London. So we, in this by-election, had to beg and borrow. Can you do us this leaflet, somebody, a friend and a friend? And basically, we won this election against the odds and the weather and everything else, but we kept going. Yeah. And people appreciated the fact that the Liberal Democrats were seen as the alternative to Labour. So that setting that narrative early on, people realised, in Sheffield, it's always between Lib Dem and Labour. And we said, yes. And we just, we had a variety of leaflets. We can talk about leaflets if you want, different types of leaflets. So it's not all Rhizol, it's not all kind of Z-fold, A-freeze, there's a variety of leaflets. But for me, most importantly, it's not the leaflets, it was the message. And we had a good mix of national messaging. Winter fuel absolutely was quite front and centre. But you know what? Freebies?
Yeah.
You know, all the stuff that's swirling around now at the moment, the NI increase, but also the fact that, you know, Labour in Sheffield have always been very town-centred, city-centred. You know, only thing that seems important to the Labour council in Sheffield is just developing the city centre. And they seem to forget the outskirts of the city. And it don't matter where you go. And Woodhouse was a classic. You know, it's got an old village square, great history. I mean, I knew Woodhouse well because I used to work for the co-op. So I used to be a manager in the co-op, used to be there. So I used to go and do the stock take. So I knew Woodhouse really well. And it wasn't too far away from where I lived. And I said it's a sort of community that has been left behind by Labour. Has been taken for granted. And all I said to my colleagues is that if we don't fill this vacuum, somebody else will. The public anger out there with this Labour government at the moment means that across the country, whoever mounts a sustainable campaign against Labour tends to win. And that's been, you know, us in many places, thankfully, but also Greens and Reform have won, like Blackpool and Wolverhampton. So that's a lesson for Liberal Democrats that, you know, if you don't do anything, somebody else might come into that vacuum that's existed now. And it might not necessarily be the big two, Tories or Labour. It'll be some of the smaller parties. And in your case, SNP possibly might want to regroup.
I think that's probably the keyest point, actually. It's effort, I think, is the main key win. I'm going to be honest, looking at how we grew, we were the only ones that went forward in Elgin City South. You know, looking at organic vote, etc., and how that compares to the council election before, you know, the rise we had was pretty much just effort, and we went for it. Like, it wasn't, we didn't, I don't actually think, you know, everybody always kind of says there's the classic Lib Dem bar graph as well. We didn't print a single bar graph on any of our messaging. It was pretty much just local issues. And we just, I know.
I'm sorry, listeners. We won't invite him on again.
If you don't have a good bar chart, you don't put a bar chart.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's exactly the point I was about to make. We didn't have something that we could organically use as a good bar chart. We do now, which is brilliant. But
and that's the thing. Sometimes the point of a by-election is to get you a decent bar chart for the next time around. And, you know, giving some...
well, Mary, I think we've got the best bar chart.
10 votes in it.
Don't waste your vote on anyone else.
No.
Sounds very similar to the Susan Murray and Midland-Bartonshire.
Yeah. And I think just to build on what...
Although Wendy had a better one with just 2 votes in it.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I'm going to be in trouble for that.
To build on what Shaff said, for the listeners that don't know, so this was a Labour-held seat that Lib Dems won, but we only won it by 10 over Reform. So Labour actually dropped down to third place. So again, what Shaff was saying about shifting sands in terms of political allegiance, and we've seen it because I do the by-election kind of work here at ALDC. Actually, you are seeing the Labour vote is tanking everywhere.
John, can I just spell out what it was?
Yes.
So in May this year, Labour got nearly 58% of the vote, 1,800 votes. We got about 6%, 195, and the rest got 300-400 each.
Yeah.
So on paper, it was massive. Like, everybody, you're never going to win this. And I was like, well, one of the things I say to my kids, and I say it to my council colleagues, particularly the newer ones, who dares wins. If you never dare, you're never going to win.
Yeah. So
you've got to dare. And so there, you know, there's a massive swing. You know, everyone went down, apart from Reform and us.
Yeah.
Well, Reform were new, so they were always going to go up, even if they got, you know, only
I think looking at old results is a really bad way to tell whether you're going to win a by-election. And that's why it's so important. And one of the first things, after you've got your candidate and your agent and a bit of a campaign plan, only a bit of a campaign plan, the first thing that you need to do is go out and knock on the doors. And it's one of the things that we do in the parliamentary by-elections as well. You know, that it's become a bit of a tradition now that Dave McCobb and Rhiannon go down and spend some time there just knocking on doors and getting a feel for people that we don't know. And thinking sometimes that helps you when you haven't got as well developed a message as Shaff already has. It helps you to actually know what the message was. So in North Shropshire, it was the ambulance times that were coming up on time and time again on the doors. And so Chesham and Amersham, we didn't think we were going to win. There was a Fed board meeting just as it was called. And a lot of the people in Fed board, including me, we had a lot of experienced campaigners there. And we were all going, be cautious, because we're not going to be able to win this. And we don't want to get people's hopes up, because one of the big things that we didn't want to do at that stage was get all of our members really excited. we'd all been through some quite disappointing experiences when we'd hyped things up from the centre and then failed, and we really didn't want to do that again. And so we were urging caution in the comms that we were doing and everything else. And then Dave and Rhiannon went down and started talking to people on the doors, and it was like, actually, we might be able to do this because people are that dissatisfied. And one of the other things that I think he was talking about, it being the general election, by-election turnout is low, really low. So if you can just speak to a few people and get particularly postal voters, Abby would kill me if I didn't talk about postal voters, but postal vote turnout is higher than everything else. You don't have to get a lot of people through the polling booth and voting for you to win in a by-election, which is why effort and having a good message and using the effort to get those out to personally to people can massively overcome what looks on paper like something that you'd never win, because of how we've performed before in council elections or general elections when there's been far higher turnout, and where effort makes a bit of a less of a difference because you're going with the national flow as well. So that's one of the reasons why by-elections are so different and can buck the trend a lot.
And I suppose, go on, Neil.
I was just going to add as well, because I think it's a really good bit to point on the on door knocking. Most people, and I know this is probably sacrilege as well, most people do not think like us as politicos. Most people do not read all the bar graphs or read all the data and who won X amount of times. That is the mindset that a lot of people, I can see the trappings go into. And to be honest, even thinking up here of what happened, other local parties, I'd say, even did start to believe that too. I mean, the Lib Dems can't win here or out of the picture here and all that. I think that was probably one of the big mistakes that they made, because they didn't see it coming where the swing came from. But knocking doors gets the visibility out, and people remember when you knock the door because there's that interaction there. Most people do not think in terms of the bar graphs and history, political history. And that's something I think that really, you just kind of emphasize the point of go knock doors.
So, again, it's because it's about individuals. And when you knock the doors, you find the individuals and you change their mind. It's not about the kind of big grand picture or any trends that we're looking at. It is, yeah. So yeah, can we all just say it together? Go knock on some doors.
Right, I'm going to ask two questions of the panel now, and I'm wondering. So obviously, the basically two types of by-elections. You're going to have one where it's a held seat, so it's a Lib Dem seat that you're trying to fight, and one where you're trying to gain, ideally. So from an opposition. So is it generally assumed in the panel that, because you can either, for people that don't know, you have to call a by-election. So it usually takes two electors, and usually someone will do it. So it can be completely outside of your control. But sometimes, as we mentioned, so we've had MPs that we know who have been elected elsewhere, but they haven't resigned straight away from the council. So you know a by-election is coming, and whether or not so example, quite a few, there's a Labour county councillor in my patch who's been elected. She has not stood down from the county council yet, and I assume she won't now because of the 6-month rule and everything else. But if you are an incumbent, if you're a Lib Dem, do you go early or do you wait? Is an interesting question. And if it's not in your control, how quickly do you start? Now, I generally think of get out the blocks quickly and establish yourself as the challengers, but I'll be really interested to hear. I'll start with you, Mary, actually. So if it's an incumbent first or you're defending, how important is it to go early or long in terms of your by-election?
I don't think that's a campaign point. I think that's more a sort of lifestyle point of things. You know, we've had some MPs that have stood down. Marie hasn't here because we've got county elections coming up in May, so there's a shorter period. I think one of the most important things is knowing whether you've got a candidate, and quite often places haven't. You know, in a lot of places, the general election has motivated people, and so you have got new people coming in who want. But in a lot of places, the general election has basically knackered us.
Yeah.
And we all just need a little bit of a rest and not to have that extra effort going into it. You know, if it got thrown on me, if there was a winnable by-election here, we would spark into action, but I'm quite glad there isn't. So I think having a candidate, making sure that you don't have anything happening at the council that is going to mess up your campaign. I mean, that was one of the things in Horsham, that they had the by-election, but they had it off the back of a really unpopular decision that the council had to make. And if you're in control of councils at the moment, let me tell you, you are not making popular decisions. That there aren't any popular decisions to make because there is no money. So making sure that you've got that sort of background, that there isn't anything going to come out in the next few weeks that the opposition are going to be able to hold against you, and making sure that you've got a candidate and a team ready. I think Shaff was talking earlier about cutting walks for places that we haven't been in before. You can do all of that beforehand. So making sure that you've got your delivery network up to speed, that you've spoken to all your members in the local area. All of that stuff can be done way before you actually call the by-election, and then you call it when you're ready to do it. And that's where we've seen our best efforts, where we've been incumbents and where we've held on to seats, and in some cases even increased our vote share in them, is where we've carefully thought about when we call it and when there isn't going to be anything else going wrong that could possibly derail it. Particularly because if you've got an incumbent, an MP or an incumbent councillor that's resigning, you're likely to be in control, or to be sometimes small groups it's not, but it is 2023 when we kept hold of Chelmsford City Council was so much more difficult than 2019. 2019 was a piece of pain compared to that. Holding on to a council when you were the incumbents and you're the one making those unpopular decisions is really, really difficult. And I think you've got to take that into account when you're looking at when to hold the by-elections.
And also, you can link Shaff. I mean, you've talked a bit about, winter fuel allowance and things like that. So at the moment, Labour Party's in a bit of the doldrums, but the Tories having a tiny bit of a bounce. It's amazing how much the Tories got a bit of a bounce when they didn't have a leader. That seemed to be doing better. And whether Kemi Badenoch will mess that up is going forward. But
that was because they weren't saying anything. The
exactly.
Tories win votes when nobody knows what they're talking about.
Absolutely. But I suppose it's that national swings as well, using that. It's what Mayo was saying, it's about your timing, getting your timing right on these things. And for you in Woodhouse, an area that was Labour facing, or Barnsley, that we know there's a by-election happening now with one of our regulars, Hannah Kitchen, otherwise she would have been on this chat. It's a good time right now to do it, but obviously local considerations, everything has to be taken into account, Shaff.
Absolutely. I mean, we're in Sheffield Council's on overall control. 3 parties are kind of part of the committee system, including us. So, added complications there. But I think the people, you're right, Mary, knocking on doors, I went out and I listened. So I said, you guys go knock on doors. I'm just going to just listen on the other side of the privet hedge. And I'll come around the corner if I have to see what votes. Because I said to people, the problem sometimes we have with door knockers, they've got so much information to give out. They go there, they're there, stand there 10 minutes, just telling them how wonderful the Lib Dems are on the council, and they might not care.
No. And I always say, if you listen to our Canvassing 101, one thing I've always said is make it about the voter. Your first question should be asking them if there are any issues they want to.
So listen to them rather than telling them what you think they want to hear, because it might not be the case. And I heard people say, oh, you're the leader, and I was like, yes. Oh my goodness, you're here as well. I was like, yes, I'm here supporting this young man. Fantastic to see somebody as young as him wanting to come and do something for the community. And a lot of the, let's be honest, a lot of the voters in some of these traditional areas are elderly, because they're the ones we were finding in a lot more. And they were saying, oh, fantastic to see some of the younger people wanting to show interest. It's always been the older people that have stood for council. So sometimes when people try to play our candidate's age, actually, it sometimes backfires, as Reform found out. Reform was, how could you vote for a teenager? Well, the teenager was one that was bothered and wants to do something for this community. And so for me, it's like you say, candidate selection, getting the message right, door knocking. But also for me, it was like the fact that we were sharing ideas. So you talked about Hannah in Barnsley. Hannah came and door knocked with us. She also listened. And I'm sure She's not confessed it, but I'm sure she's taken away things she must have heard here to say that's useful. I'm taking that up. Adam Carter from Rotherham, Drew Tormey and the others from Rotherham came over. Wasn't too far from them. It was the right side of the city for them. So they came across also to kind of door knock and deliver, but also, kind of just be part of the team. And that's the other thing. We've got new people that have never done certain things, and we've created the space for them to learn. So that's the other thing that by-elections do. They create the space for people to get the experiences. And that's why it's really important that, I know we talked about national by-elections, Chesham and Amersham and others. I always try to take some new people with me to these by-elections so they can have a bit of a difference for experience. And it's time in the car. If I'm driving down, I've got them in my car now for a couple of hours, and we could talk to each other. And to me, we have to make it fun.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, go out in the wind and the rain. We've got to have a laugh and a joke, and we've always tried to have, action days. One of our members, John Dryden, fantastic. He makes lovely cakes. So, bring cakes. John Dryden's he's got his cake. He's been baking all night. So we've had we've had fun as well. It's not just been about slogging the streets, and it's been a team effort, and it's fantastic. And for me, it shows that Lib Dems can build on what we've got. The 72 MPs isn't our high point, actually. It's a stepping stone as far as I'm concerned, and the opportunities that these by-elections now bring. Because in this part of Sheffield, put my hands up, traditionally it's not been our strongest area. However, we've got 3 councillors in the neighbouring ward of Bayton. We've got 2 in Mosborough. Now we've got another one. We've got 6 now. And in 2016, we had 0. That shows the progress and growth that Sheffield Lib Dems have done since the coalition years.
I just wanted to really pick up on the fact that you have to. The other thing that's so important about by-elections is having fun, but using them as a learning opportunity. We would not have won so many seats in the general election if it hadn't been for the by-elections. And that's not just the thing that people always say about it getting us attention. And it's about the fact that at every single one of those by-elections, there were at least 3 paid organisers from various local parties around the country that got chucked in there to do it. And I know how valuable that was, because that was how I started 8 years ago. It's 8 years ago was the Richmond Park by-election. And I spent the most wonderful week in a really tiny office that got really smelly by the end of polling day, because we'd all been out wrapped up in our woolies and doing good mornings, and then came and sat in this small little room. It was disgusting. But you learn so much from being at a big parliamentary by-election, or even at a small local by-election, that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And you make those connections, and you find the friends that are going to be with you forever. And I think it's really important, especially in areas like yours, Shaff, where we traditionally haven't done as well at the moment because we've had a Tory government, but having that sort of cross-pollination of Barnsley and you and John going over and having so many different people making those connections and finding the people that they actually realise that this is fun to do things with, means that when you then have another by-election that you can win, or when you have a general election and you all have to pile into the one place that is actually your target seat in the area, you've got that network of people. So that's the other thing that by-elections are so important for, is building up your skills and building up your network and making people feel like it is actually a fun thing to do, as well as something that's like really, really important and world-changing.
Yeah, and it's I'm going to use 2 different. It's about being battle hardened and game ready, isn't it? That's the kind of thing these people come into it. And so you can, like, say because I'm a by-election. I got elected in a by-election right in the middle of the tuition fees debacle in 2020, in 2010. But because we had done experience, we understood where we needed to be. We held off Labour in a northern town when it was a really difficult time to do it, and we take it from it because the cycle of politics coming. And Shaff's mentioned it about reform and the Greens. You are going to have to deal with the unexpected. So, and also different campaign tactics, Neil. I mean, obviously in Scotland you have different voter preferences, and it's a whole different ball game up there. But in various different by-elections we've seen, so when Reform really ploughed into another Hannah Perkin ward in Kent, they did mass canvassing, but very little leaflets. So again, being able to adjust and knowing how to, that you might have to, you don't want to adjust too much on what the opposition do, but being able to be flexible enough to make sure you're making the right decisions at the right time during a by-election is really key, Neil.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all quite relative as well. I think there's, to touch on that point as well, education was really key for us. I mean, we are not in the same luxury as some of the local parties that we see. We're establishing ourselves, so people are learning new roles. We had an election agent this year who did both elections and learned an incredible amount. My election agent, Bob, who was brilliant all year and a brilliant rock for me. And then people who have never canvassed before, even never leafleted before in the area. So there was a lot of learning curves for that. And now it was almost like, to use the rugby analogy, we've now got that match fitness bit. So we'll be ready for whatever the next one that comes along. So we're in a really good state like that. Conversely, you look just down the road at Highland, they're battle hardened and they've done, goodness, I hope they don't have many more by-elections coming up, because they've really had a bit of a bad luck of the green there. But having said that, coming back to your original question about timing, Angus MacDonald won the MP seat, and they had a really good personal relationship with a person who was then ready. They had material ready to go by the looks of things, and they went out and really smashed the Fort William by-election. So that's what happened next. And that was just last week, that incredible swing result in Charles Kennedy's old neck of the woods, which was, I'm sure a lot of people were really, really happy to see. So I think the timing can be quite crucial. But I've also seen it from the other side, where a councillor's resigned and nobody knew it was coming at all. Nobody heard from the person. They resigned. It was pretty bad for us in the local press for a bit. Got attacked from pretty much every other group. So having that relationship and knowing what's going on in the personal lives, I think, is really, really crucial for local chairs or for local leaders, etc. But there's probably never really a good time if you're defending, I imagine. But you can do things to make sure you're ready, I suppose.
And one of the things I would just, before you come in, Shaff, is one thing we bang about this a lot on the podcast, is actually getting your marked registers. It's so important. If you're in a by-election, particularly we've talked about, kind of areas that you've never campaigned, so you've got bugger all voter ID in the Connect system. But what you do know, okay, who's voted in the local elections, who votes in the general election, who's vote. And one of the key things, I've talked about this in the past, that I have marked registers going back every year for my council elections. So, okay, which Tories voted in 2021, but then didn't vote in subsequent years, who are at risk of coming back next year? And so being clever and targeted. And if you're fairly new to campaigning and thinking, oh my God, I have no idea what these four are talking about, it all seems way over. This stuff, there are loads of people all over, all parts of the country that can help you with this. Whether it's, I'm going to give a little plug, whether it's ALDC or the HQ or your development officers or just your next local party that's maybe a bit more active than you. There is help to get all this stuff. And it is about, sometimes, Shaff, it is about knowing. And actually, and one of the things, because what you are going to have in a by-election, you're going to be time pressured. And it's that making sure, because from corner the election, you might only have a few weeks before those postal votes start dropping. So you've really got to try and get on there and get going straight away.
Absolutely. Look, we had help from ALDC. We had financial support as well. There's obviously a grant application.
It's called the Fighting Fund, if anyone wants.
Fighting Fund, there you go. That's what we had. And you're right, the more registers, I put them in myself. I thought, the nights are dark. I can put the news on. I don't need to look at the I know what they look like. I could just hear, and I just need to listen to what they're saying. And I just entered the marked register in the front room where I'm sat here now. Locals first and general election afterwards. I'm still beavering my way through others, as are my colleagues. And it's really important that you do that. And like you say, ALDC were there to help and support, as well as the regional party. I'll give a plug for the regional kind of campaign manager, Rob Jacks. He was there just to kind of, give us an overview and keep an eye on the leaflets to make sure that we were on message and weren't doing something that the National Party would be upset with. That's what we did. And the other thing is, look, there'll always be circumstances and stuff in your diary. So for the Sheffield Liberal Democrats, we thought it was a fantastic idea last year to have the regional conference in November in Sheffield. Of course, 2 weeks out from the general election, the local Woodhouse election, it fell. And then one of our by-election winners from earlier this year, John, Will Satwell, just happened to, book a diary date in for his wedding. Final weekend of Woodhouse. So you think, oh my goodness, what is going off here? We're going to be really tied up. And yeah, of course, I said to colleagues, look, if you're booked in for the stag night, I'm not going to be a killjoy and say, no, I insist you don't go there. So, we had people with commitments, and some of it was having fun. They went paintballing and they shot up the groom.
Maybe that was a good thing for
so like I said, we had fun. We still had fun. There was a time and a place for it. And we didn't cancel Christmas. We didn't cancel Will's wedding, and we didn't cancel regional conference. But what we said is, okay, if you're going to these things, can you make sure you come during the week? And do you put your time in then? And at the weekends, if the wedding's on Saturday, we'll have to put some extra time in on Sunday. So it's about managing your time. It's not about burning your team out either. I used to say to our candidate, right, make sure you have an extra layer of clothes on, because it's easier to take a jacket off than try to go and find one. And there's times when I said, you know what, enough.
Have you not got the by-election boot? I mean, I have basically a rain jacket, a long jacket, and a fleece permanently in my boot, just so all weathers I can canvass. Basically.
And the weather here changes all sorts. We've had the snow and the ice, and then we had 15 degrees, and you're thinking, what's going off here? Last week, we've snow, so the Snake Pass and the Woodhead Pass between Sheffield and Manchester were all blocked, and now we've got sun. So, for me, it's being prepared for all circumstances. You're right. We shouldn't follow what the opposition do, because we have a campaign plan. We know what it is and what to do. But, our opponents, in this case, Reform, they had their plan. They had their organisers. They also had teams of 20 to 30. So it wasn't that just the Lib Dems were active. And the Labour Party, sorry, John, I didn't mention this. The Labour Party had 5 of their MPs plus 40 plus activists. And they included the previous Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, was also...
She's having a rough week.
Yeah. She did have a rough week. Woodhouse the night before, and then she having to resign. So, it wasn't that Labour, didn't try hard. They tried their best to win. Reform. And to be honest, I said to my team, I enjoy this now. I don't want any of them to go easy on us. You give us your best, we give our best, and see what happened. And luckily for us, we were on the right side of the result, but Labour were shell-shocked.
Yeah. And I think
from 50-odd% of the vote to come in third in a seat that they've had an MP for living memory. I mean, I lived in this area for almost 50 years. It's never been anything but Labour. And
Neil,
that's the change that's happening, guys. Seriously, in the north in particular, in Labour-facing areas, massive change.
And as someone who has a horrendous Labour council who are very cocky, very arrogant, I'm very much looking forward to these next few years. I'll be honest with you. Maybe that's because and Neil's the big rugby player here, but I really enjoy a tussle, and I think, and it's just going to be so much nicer. But I just want to finish off the episode just talking about anything else. Neil, start with yourself. Things that people should take into consideration about what's slightly different about a by-election, or your top tip for people who are thinking, right, I have no idea what I should be doing if one's called.
Oh, that's a good question, because we've covered so much already. I think we probably really, just to get my brownie points in here as well, we should really encourage people to go to ALDC. I think they were an incredible support network, even for things like templates and things like that.
People are actually going to think I've told you guys to say this, and I promise listeners of you, I have not told them to say this whatsoever.
This is how we get our royalties.
Christmas bonus.
Yeah, I think it's really just kind of believing in, it is actually having that sports mentality of believing in yourself, because if you kind of believe the local stick, or you can't win here, nothing will change, then nothing will change. I think Shaff was kind of touching on it. Things are shifting, and that's not just with Labour. I mean, the Scottish government and the SNP government have been atrocious. I mean, the north of Scotland particularly has just been absolutely abandoned in recent years, especially on issues such as the A96. So I think, establishing that kind of local message is really, really key. But just if you feel like you are wanting to do it and be an impact in your community, just go and chuck yourself into it. Go and knock the doors, like we were saying. I think that's the main thing, and then look for the support where you can from people who know what they're doing too. Because from what I've found in my time learning in the last couple of years, there are brilliant community people right across the country who are willing to advise and give help.
There's something quite enjoyable, Mary, about having a nothing to lose kind of campaign when you're doing a by-election sometimes, where it's just you can do that kind of the us against the world kind of thing, and it's really rewarding. Like, and I'm sure it was the same in Sheffield. Like, we had no expectation, of ever coming close to that ward previously, and it's like, right, we're just gonna do it, which is quite fun. But your top tip, Mary?
My top tip is don't imagine that you're the first person to do this. There, as Neil said, there are hundreds of us who have won by-elections, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So ask people for help. Use the templates that are on both ALDC and HQ. And my other thing is, Connect is a mine of golden nuggets, sometimes in a pile of poo, but find them. When people say, oh, we've got no data in this area, that's rubbish. You have data, whether it's the marked registers, whether it's the postal vote registers so that you know who to target, whether it's my big thing that my campaign has lots of data in. I can guarantee you there is not a single ward in this country where we haven't got at least one email address from somebody that has signed a national petition. So before you start doing leaflets or anything else, go and find those people that have interacted with us before that you've never been to see because it hasn't been a target area before, and knock on the doors of those people that signed the best petition in Connect. And it's a long time ago now, but there was a petition that we did on stopping Trump coming to the UK years ago, 2017, I think. And it's still in there as a question response. Those people are always Liberal Democrats. So, and an awful lot of them will help us to do stuff. So find those people that at some point in the past have interacted with us, given their email address or something, and go and knock on their doors and ask them if they want to get involved, because that's how you build a team up. And there is so much of that data in every area, hidden deep in the depths of Connect, just waiting for you to find it and then use that data to go and form the connections that you need to build your team that can either win or get you ready to win in the future.
Shaff, finish us off. Your top tip.
Top tip is, don't be scared of taking risks. Don't be scared of experimenting. Don't be scared of thinking the unthinkable, that you can actually win here, because it actually, I'm living proof. I'm sat here, a big smile on my face. I've got full council tomorrow. I can't wait to get in there because we're going to introduce this. And, there's a massive fight going off in our group. Who's going to introduce this young man to the council? Each one saying, I want to do it. And my deputy said, you just do it as leader. I was like, no. So we're going to have a right discussion at group tomorrow. Who's going to introduce this young man? So, that it gives you that positivity. And as we said earlier, look, top tip, there's plenty of friends in the party that you can pick up the phone, get on a Zoom call like this and actually learn. Because like Mary says, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel already exists. That we've won by-elections, parliamentary and local council, up and down the country, different facing, Labour facing, Tory facing, SNP facing. So we know how to win by-elections. We are the experts. That's not me saying it. Just ask anybody in the press. They'll tell you that Lib Dems for the last 30 years have been the experts at winning by-elections, local, regional and national. And, and have fun and, enjoy yourself, because sometimes the by-elections are the stepping stone to better things, taking control of the council, having more seats in the Scottish Assembly, Parliament, wherever you call it up there.
Scottish Parliament.
Yeah, whatever it's called. Actually...
You were doing so well, Shaff. No, it's absolutely great. So thank you so much. The only point I would make is that I've been on the back of narrow defeats as well. And I think one thing, just by-elections are super intense. And so just having a bit of expectation management and pastoral care for your candidates, your volunteers, your agent even, just looking after people, getting in. But it's a fantastic opportunity. And like Shaff said, we are the experts at this. We have people who have done really well at it, because it enables us, when we're all spread too thin or anything else, to come into an area and really build and grow. But if you guys have any questions, comments, want to ask us anything, please get in touch with us. You can email the podcast, you can contact us on social media. But I want to thank Mary, Shaff and Neil for coming on this podcast. We'll have loads more coming up, because I don't think politics is going to get any quieter over the next few years. And I've got to decide whether I'm even going to be up for election next year, because my council might be getting cancelled. So we will absolutely see what happens. And that's happening this week, apparently. But thank you very much for listening and watching. We'll be back with more soon, and we will see you on the next episode.